Get out now. This isn't the project. You can't just walk in here with your welfare baby expecting a handout. The hostess blocked the entrance. Her designer heels clicked on marble. Look at you. Probably can't even afford our appetizers. Did you wander in looking for the food bank? Dr. Naomi Wells shifted baby Lila gently. She stood at the entrance, her daughter Lila balanced on her hip. The baby's fingers grabbed at the string of pearls around Naomi's neck, real ones, inherited from her grandmother. Naomi wore a navy dress that had cost her 2 shifts' worth of overtime, her natural hair twisted into an elegant updo that had taken an hour to perfect. She looked every bit like she belonged here, but belonging, she was learning, had nothing to do with how you looked. I said step away from the entrance. The hostess, a blonde woman whose name tag read Claire, positioned herself in the doorway like a sentinel. Her smile was sharp enough to draw blood. I have a reservation, Naomi said calmly. Lila squirmed, sensing tension the way babies do. Wells, 7:30. Claire's eyes traveled from Naomi's face down to her shoes and back up again, the kind of scan security guards give shoplifters. I don't see it. It's under my husband's name then, Marcus Wells. Still don't see it. Around them, other guests slowed their approach to the entrance, phones already gravitating toward hands, that modern instinct for documentation kicking in before anyone fully understood what they were witnessing. Naomi pulled out her phone, her free hand steady despite the weight of her daughter. I have the confirmation email right here. It's paid in full. Anniversary dinner. I made this reservation 3 months ago. Claire didn't look at the phone. She looked past Naomi, toward the street, as if the woman and child in front of her were an obstacle that would disappear if ignored long enough. Ma'am, this establishment serves a very particular clientele. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at... I'd be comfortable at the table I reserved. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice. Naomi hadn't raised it. A man in an expensive suit paused on his way inside, his date clutching his arm. They watched with the fascinated horror of people observing a car crash. Someone's phone was definitely recording now. Naomi could see the telltale red dot in her peripheral vision. This place isn't for people like you, Claire said, quiet enough that only Naomi could hear clearly, loud enough that the people nearby understood the shape of it. Naomi felt something cold settle in her chest. She'd known this feeling before. In medical school, when professors assumed she was a nurse. In hospitals, when patients asked for a real doctor. In department stores, when security followed her through aisles. She'd learned to move through the world carrying proof of her humanity in her credentials, her clothing, her carefully modulated voice that white people called articulate, like it was a compliment. But tonight wasn't about proving anything. Tonight was about memory. 6 hours earlier, she'd stood in her bathroom, mascara wand trembling in her hand, staring at her reflection and trying to remember how to be a person instead of just a mother, a widow, a wound that walked. The reservation at Maison Aurel had been Marcus's surprise last year, their 5th anniversary, the last one before the car accident that turned her husband into past tense. He'd been so proud, securing a table at a place with a 6-month wait list, somewhere fancy enough to make her feel special. You work so hard, he'd said, kissing her forehead in that way that always made her feel seen. Let someone else take care of you for once. They never made it to that dinner. His car was T-boned by a drunk driver on his way home from the hospital where he'd been visiting his mother. Naomi got the call while she was giving Lila a bath, her daughter's laughter echoing off the bathroom tiles, completely unaware that her father was already gone. The reservation had remained in her email like a ghost. For months, she couldn't delete it. Then, slowly, through grief counseling and therapy and the brutal arithmetic of surviving each day, she decided to keep it, to go, to take their daughter and honor the intention even if the man who'd made it was ash in an urn on their mantle. I'm going to show you my confirmation email, Naomi said now, her voice still calm, still controlled, because she'd learned that anger from a black woman was always interpreted as aggression. She raised her phone slowly, making her movements visible and unthreatening. Claire slapped her hand away. The sound cracked through the evening air. Naomi's phone clattered to the ground. Lila started crying, her wail piercing and afraid. Around them, gasps rippled through the small crowd that had gathered. "Oh my God," someone said. "Are you seeing this?" another voice asked. "If this makes your blood boil, hit that like button right now, because it gets so much worse before it gets better. Drop a comment telling me what you would have done in this situation, and subscribe because you need to see how this ends. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next." Claire's face flushed, but her jaw set with defiance. "You were being aggressive. I felt threatened." Naomi bent carefully, protecting her crying daughter while reaching for her phone. The screen was cracked, a spiderweb of broken glass spreading from the corner. Her hands shook as she stood back up, bouncing Lila gently, whispering reassurances into her baby's hair. "I'm calling the police," Claire announced to the crowd, pulling out her own phone with the theatrical flair of someone performing righteousness. "This woman is refusing to leave private property." "She has a reservation," an elderly white woman called out from the line. "I heard her say it." Claire ignored her, already speaking into her phone. "Yes, I need police at Maison Aurel. There's a woman here causing a disturbance. She's being verbally aggressive, and I'm concerned for our guest's safety. She has a baby with her, and I'm worried about the child's welfare given her behavior." Naomi felt the world tilt. The accusation hung in the air like poison, concern for the child's welfare. It was a weapon Claire knew how to use, the coded language that could separate a mother from her baby faster than anything else. Naomi pulled Lila closer, her daughter's tears soaking into the shoulder of her expensive dress. "I haven't done anything wrong," Naomi said, and hated how her voice cracked. "I have a reservation. I have proof. I just want to have dinner." But the crowd was splitting now, the way crowds always do. Some people filmed. Some whispered. Some looked away, grateful it wasn't happening to them, willing to trade someone else's dignity for their own comfort. A man in a suit steered his wife around the commotion, muttering about drama, as if injustice was an inconvenience rather than a choice. The elderly woman who'd spoken up before moved closer. "Young lady, I saw everything. She hit your phone out of your hand. That's assault." "Ma'am, please step back," Claire said, her voice dripping with false courtesy. "This doesn't concern you. It concerns anyone with eyes and a conscience." But Claire had already turned away, speaking to the restaurant's manager who'd emerged from inside. A thin man in his 50s with silver hair and the expression of someone who'd mastered the art of seeing nothing he didn't want to see. His name tag read Paul Henning, General Manager. "Paul, this woman doesn't have a reservation and she's refusing to leave. She's been aggressive, and I had to defend myself." Paul looked at Naomi the way people look at problems they wish would solve themselves. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises." "I have a reservation." "We have no record of it." "Then your system is wrong." "Our system," Paul said with the carefully modulated patience of someone used to being right, "is quite reliable." Naomi pulled up her email again on her cracked screen, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped the phone a second time. She held it out, showing the confirmation from 3 months ago. Reservation for 2 at 7:30 p.m. under Marcus Wells. Confirmation number clearly visible. Prepayment receipt attached. Paul glanced at it for less than a second. That could be edited. Anyone can fake an email. "Why would I fake?" Naomi stopped, understanding flooding through her with sickening clarity. It didn't matter what she showed them. It didn't matter what she said. They'd already decided who she was the moment they saw her skin. Lila's crying had subsided to hiccuping whimpers, her little fist clutching Naomi's necklace. 6 months old, too young to understand that the world her mother had tried so hard to protect her from had just shown its teeth. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. "This is insane," the elderly woman said, her voice rising. "I'm a regular here, Paul. I've eaten at this restaurant for 15 years. This woman has done nothing wrong, and you know it. Mrs. Patterson, I appreciate your concern, but this is a management issue. It's a racism issue. The word dropped like a bomb. Several people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Paul's face went rigid. Claire's eyes flashed with something between fear and fury. That's a very serious accusation, Paul said quietly. Then stop giving me reasons to make it. 2 police cars pulled up to the curb, lights flashing but sirens cutting off. 4 officers emerged, but only 2 approached. A stocky white officer whose nameplate read Holloway, and a younger Latino officer named Ortega. Holloway moved with the swagger of someone who enjoyed being called to scenes, his hand resting casually on his belt near his weapon. Ortega hung back slightly, his eyes already scanning the crowd of phones pointed in their direction. "What's the situation?" Holloway asked, directing his question at Paul and Claire, as if Naomi didn't exist. "This woman is trespassing," Claire said immediately. "She doesn't have a reservation, but she's refusing to leave. She was aggressive when I asked her to step away, and I'm concerned about the baby's safety given her unstable behavior." Naomi felt her stomach drop. Unstable. It was another weapon, another word that could justify anything that came next. "That's not true," Naomi said, forcing her voice steady. "I have a reservation. I have proof. She hit my phone out of my hand when I tried to show it to her." Holloway's eyes finally landed on Naomi, traveling over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Ma'am, do you have identification?" "Of course I do, but I'm going to need to see it." "Am I being detained?" "I'm asking for your ID. You going to give it to me, or are we going to have a problem?" The crowd had grown larger now, phones everywhere, recording from multiple angles. A young black man with dreadlocks had positioned himself to get a clear shot of everything. A white woman in yoga clothes was live streaming, her commentary barely audible. "This is insane, you guys. They're harassing this woman for literally just trying to have dinner." Naomi shifted Lila to one hip and reached into her purse for her wallet. Her hands trembled as she pulled out her license. Dr. Naomi Wells, MD. Her hospital ID was visible too. St. Catherine's Medical Center, Pediatric Trauma Surgery. Holloway took the license without looking at it closely, running it instead, his radio crackling with dispatch codes. Ortega stood to the side, his discomfort visible in the set of his shoulders, but his mouth stayed shut. "You a doctor?" Holloway asked, his tone suggesting the ID might be as fake as Paul had suggested her email was. "Yes, pediatric surgeon at St. Catherine's." "That's what it says." "Uh-huh." Holloway handed the license back. "And you're here with your baby because I have a dinner reservation that I made 3 months ago. Restaurant says you don't. The restaurant is wrong, or you're lying." The elderly woman, Mrs. Patterson, stepped forward again. "Officer, I witnessed the entire interaction. This young woman has been nothing but polite." The hostess struck her phone out of her hand. "That's assault. The woman being harassed is the victim here. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back. I'm a witness. Step back or I'll cite you for interfering with an investigation." Mrs. Patterson's mouth opened in shock, but she took a step backward, her husband's hand on her arm, pulling her to safety. The cost of helping, Naomi realized, only went so far when you had something to lose. Holloway turned back to Naomi. "I'm going to need to search your bag." "On what grounds?" "I have reasonable suspicion that you may be in possession of something illegal." "Reasonable suspicion based on what?" Naomi's voice was still calm, but something was fracturing inside her. The professional composure she'd built over years of navigating rooms where she was the only one who looked like her. "I haven't committed a crime. I have a reservation. I'm holding my 6-month-old daughter." "Your bag, ma'am." "This is illegal search and seizure. 4th Amendment. You need probable cause." Holloway's jaw tightened. "You refusing to comply?" The question was a trap, and they both knew it. Refuse and give him justification for escalation. Comply and surrender the last shred of dignity she had left. Around them, the phones kept recording. The young man with dreadlocks had moved closer, his camera steady, His face set with the expression of someone who'd seen this movie before and knew exactly how it ended. "I'm not refusing," Naomi said carefully. "I'm asking what crime you suspect me of committing that would justify a search." "Trespassing, disorderly conduct, and like I said, reasonable suspicion." Holloway reached for her purse. Naomi had no choice but to hand it over, switching Lila to her other hip. Her daughter had gone quiet, that unnatural stillness babies get when they sense their parents' fear. Holloway dumped the contents onto a nearby bench. Wallet, diapers, baby wipes, pacifier, emergency medical supplies she always carried, a novel she'd been trying to read for 3 months, chapstick, receipts, the debris of motherhood and exhaustion. He picked through it with a kind of invasive thoroughness meant to humiliate rather than investigate. Opened her wallet, counted her cash, examined her credit cards, unzipped the small pocket where she kept emergency medication, infant Tylenol, her own prescription for anxiety she'd needed since Marcus died. "What's this?" He held up the amber prescription bottle. "Lorazepam, for anxiety, prescribed by my doctor. You can see my name on the label. You take anxiety medication and you're responsible for a baby?" The question landed like a punch. Naomi felt tears sting her eyes and furiously blinked them back. "I'm a surgeon. I save children's lives for a living. I take medication prescribed by a psychiatrist to manage grief from losing my husband. The two things are not mutually exclusive. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to calm down." "I am calm. Your voice is raised." It wasn't. But truth had stopped mattering somewhere around the time Claire had first looked at her like she was trash that needed removing. Ortega shifted his weight, finally speaking. "Holloway, maybe you should let me do my job, Ortega." The younger officer went quiet again, but something flickered across his face. Not quite courage, not quite complicity. Something in between that Naomi couldn't name but recognized from medical teams when a senior surgeon was making a mistake, and everyone knew it, but no one wanted to be the one to say it out loud. Holloway put her belongings back in her purse with careless hands, then pulled out his radio. "Dispatch, can you connect me with Child Protective Services? I've got a situation here with potential child endangerment." "No." The word ripped out of Naomi before she could stop it. "No, you cannot take my daughter. Ma'am, you're exhibiting unstable behavior. You're on medication for mental health issues. You brought your infant into a confrontational situation. I have a duty to ensure that child's safety." This was the nightmare every black mother carried in her bones. The knowledge that love was not protection, that the state could reach in and rip your children away and call it rescue. Naomi's arms tightened around Lila so hard her daughter whimpered. "I'm a doctor," Naomi said, and hated how desperate she sounded. "I'm a pediatric trauma surgeon. I have never hurt my daughter. I would never hurt my daughter. I came here for a dinner reservation and I've been assaulted and harassed and illegally searched, and you're threatening to take my baby because I asked to be treated like a human being." "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to hand over the child." "Absolutely not. Then I'll have to place you under arrest for obstruction." The crowd erupted, voices shouting, someone screaming, "This is wrong!" The live-streaming woman was crying as she filmed, her voice breaking. "They're going to arrest her for nothing. Oh my God, someone do something!" But doing something meant putting yourself between power and its target, and most people weren't built for that kind of courage. They could film, they could post, they could bear witness, but standing in the gap, that was different. Holloway reached for Naomi's arm and she jerked back instinctively, protective of Lila, her whole body screaming run, but her mind knowing that running would justify whatever came next. "Don't touch me," she said. "I haven't broken any laws." "You're resisting." "I'm not resisting. I'm holding my daughter. Last warning, hand over the child and place your hands behind your back." Naomi looked desperately at Ortega, the younger officer who'd at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Please." "You know this is wrong. You know it." Ortega's eyes met hers for a moment, and she saw it there, agreement, shame, fear, the paralysis of someone trapped between conscience and career. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Looked away. That's it. Holloway grabbed Naomi's arm, his grip bruising. You're under arrest for trespassing, disorderly conduct, and resisting arrest. Lila started screaming. High-pitched, terrified baby screams that made people's faces crumple with the visceral wrongness of it all. Naomi tried to twist away, not to escape, but to protect her daughter from the rough hands pulling at her arm. "Stop fighting!" Holloway shouted, though she wasn't fighting, though every movement was defensive, protective, maternal. He wrenched her arm behind her back. The motion pulled her away from Lila, the physics of it making her lean forward, and suddenly she had to choose: drop her daughter or let her arm be twisted to the point of breaking. "Take her!" Naomi gasped to Mrs. Patterson, thrusting Lila toward the elderly woman because it was the only safe pair of hands she could see. The baby's screams intensified as she left her mother's arms, confusion and fear in every wail. The cold metal of handcuffs bit into Naomi's wrists. She was being shoved forward, bent over, her dress riding up, her dignity being stripped away in front of dozens of recording phones. "You have the right to remain silent," Holloway recited in a bored monotone, the Miranda rights becoming a formality over the soundtrack of a baby's terrified crying. "I'm shaking just narrating this. If you've ever felt powerless watching injustice happen, click that subscribe button, and I need you to comment below. Have you or someone you know ever been profiled like this? Because this woman's about to make a phone call that changes everything, and you won't believe who she calls. Stay with me." Naomi couldn't hear the rest over Lila's screams and her own heart pounding in her ears. She caught a glimpse of her daughter in Mrs. Patterson's arms, the old woman's face wet with tears, bouncing the baby with practiced grandmother movements that weren't working. "I get one phone call," Naomi said, her voice shaking now, the professional composure finally crumbling. "I get one phone call. You'll get it at the station." "No, now. That's my right." Holloway sighed with exaggerated patience. "Fine. You got a lawyer?" Naomi thought fast, her mind racing through possibilities. Her lawyer was for estate planning, useless in this situation. She needed someone with immediate power, someone who could stop this nightmare before it became permanent record, before CPS got involved, before the system that was supposed to protect people devoured her whole. She thought of the confirmation email, the reservation, the restaurant's parent company. And suddenly she remembered. Marcus had been so proud when he'd made the reservation because he'd had to call the corporate office directly. Maison Aurel was part of Verity Dining Group, an empire of upscale restaurants owned by Evan Cross, a man Marcus had met once at a hospital fundraiser, a man who'd donated millions to St. Catherine's Medical Center, a man whose daughter Naomi had operated on 2 years ago after a riding accident. "I need to call Evan Cross," Naomi said. Holloway laughed. "You're telling me you have the CEO of Verity Dining on speed dial? His daughter is alive because I removed a splinter of her spine after she fell off a horse. I operated for 11 hours. He gave me his private number and told me if I ever needed anything, ever to call him. I need to call him. Now!" Something flickered across Holloway's face. Uncertainty replacing confidence. Paul Henning, who'd been standing to the side watching the arrest with the detached interest of someone convinced they were on the right side of things, suddenly looked very pale. "You can't just call," Paul started. "I can and I will. That's my right. One phone call." Naomi turned her head as much as she could with her arms cuffed behind her back. "My phone is in my purse. The number is saved under Cross, Evan. You can dial it. Put it on speaker. I have nothing to hide." Holloway looked at Paul, who looked at Claire, who had gone very still and very quiet. The crowd pressed closer, phones capturing every second. The young man with dreadlocks spoke for the first time. "Y'all better let her make that call. The whole world is watching." Ortega picked up Naomi's phone from her purse, the screen still cracked from when Claire had struck it. "The number's here," he confirmed quietly. "Fine." Holloway nodded. "Make the call, but if you're wasting our time..." "I'm not." Ortega dialed. The phone rang once, twice. Naomi's heart hammered. It was almost 9 o'clock on a Friday night. What if he didn't answer? What if... Dr. Wells? Evan Cross's voice came through the speaker, concerned and immediate. Is everything all right? I have your number saved. I saw it was you calling. Mr. Cross. Naomi's voice cracked. She couldn't stop it anymore. I'm at Maison Aurel, your restaurant. I had a reservation. They refused to seat me. The hostess hit my phone out of my hand. I'm handcuffed right now. My baby is screaming. They're threatening to call CPS. I haven't done anything wrong and I need help. The silence on the other end lasted only a heartbeat. When Evan spoke again, his voice had gone cold and hard. Put whoever's in charge on the phone, now. Holloway grabbed the phone. This is Officer Grant Holloway, Westbridge PD. Who am I speaking to? Evan Cross. I own the restaurant you're standing in front of. I'm going to need you to explain to me very carefully why one of the finest surgeons I've ever met, a woman who saved my daughter's life, is in handcuffs outside my establishment. Sir, she was trespassing. The restaurant staff called us because I don't care what the staff said. Dr. Wells doesn't trespass. If she says she has a reservation, she has a reservation. I want video footage from your body camera sent to me immediately. I want the names of every employee who was involved in this situation. And I want her uncuffed in the next 30 seconds, or I will personally ensure that the mayor hears about how his police force treats trauma surgeons who save children's lives. Holloway's face had gone red, then white. Mr. Cross, with all due respect, I don't want your respect. I want Dr. Wells released, now. Paul stepped forward, his voice desperate. Mr. Cross, there's been a misunderstanding. We can resolve this. Paul Henning, isn't it? You're the general manager? Yes, sir. You're fired. Security will escort you from the property when you arrive tomorrow to collect your belongings. The hostess who struck Dr. Wells, what's her name? Claire Whitmore, someone in the crowd called out helpfully. Claire Whitmore is also fired, effective immediately. Someone find her and make sure she understands she's no longer employed by any Verity property. Anyone else who stood by and watched this happen, I want their names on my desk by midnight. That's what accountability looks like. If this moment just gave you chills, hit that like button. Now here's my question for you in the comments. Do you think the hostess and the cop got what they deserved, or was the punishment not enough? Drop your honest opinion below. And subscribe because the courtroom verdict is coming up next and it's going to blow your mind, but only if you make it to the end of this video. Claire made a sound like a wounded animal. You can't fire me over the phone. I was protecting the restaurant's reputation. She didn't belong. She didn't belong? Evan's voice could have cut glass. Dr. Naomi Wells, who did her undergrad at Stanford, medical school at Johns Hopkins, surgical residency at Massachusetts General, who has saved more lives than you've served overpriced entrees, didn't belong? At a restaurant I built to serve excellence? You're goddamn right she didn't belong. She was too good for it. And you made sure she knew that, didn't you? The crowd had gone completely silent, except for Lila's continued crying. Mrs. Patterson was still holding the baby, rocking her gently, but the child was inconsolable. Her mother just feet away, but unreachable. Officer Holloway, Evan continued, I'm going to send you an email right now with Dr. Wells's reservation confirmation. It was made 3 months ago by her late husband, Marcus Wells, who died in a car accident before they could celebrate their anniversary. She came alone with their infant daughter to honor his memory. Does that sound like someone who deserves to be arrested? Holloway said nothing. I'll take your silence as acknowledgement. Take the handcuffs off, now, or I call the mayor, the police chief, and every news outlet in this city. And I make sure everyone knows the Westbridge PD arrests grieving mothers for trying to have dinner. Holloway's hands shook as he unlocked the handcuffs. The metal scraped Naomi's wrists as it came off, leaving red marks that would bruise by morning. The moment her hands were free, she stumbled toward Mrs. Patterson and Lila, scooping her daughter into her arms. Mama's here, baby. Mama's here. She buried her face in Lila's hair, breathing in the baby shampoo smell, feeling the small body's shudders as the crying finally began to subside into hiccuping gasps. Dr. Wells, Evan's voice came through the phone speaker again, gentler now. Are you all right? No, Naomi said honestly. But I will be. Thank you. I'm so sorry. This should never have happened. I'm looking at security footage right now. We have cameras on the entrance. I'm seeing everything. The dismissal, the physical assault, the illegal search. All of it. You have cameras? Naomi felt something fierce and vindicating rise in her chest. High definition, multiple angles, every word captured, and it's not going away. This footage, plus everything these witnesses recorded, Dr. Wells, I promise you, there will be consequences. Real ones. Paul was backing toward his car, his face ashen. Claire stood frozen, her earlier defiance collapsing into the dawning realization of what she'd just lost. Holloway looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Mr. Cross, Naomi said, her voice steadier now with Lila safe in her arms. I appreciate everything you're doing, but I don't want just internal consequences. I want them charged. The hostess assaulted me. The officer conducted an illegal search. Both of them threatened to take my daughter. There were dozens of witnesses. There's video evidence. I want the law to apply to them the way they tried to apply it to me. You'll have the best lawyers money can buy, Evans said immediately. I'll cover all costs. And Dr. Wells? You're still welcome at any Verity restaurant, any time. In fact, the reservation your husband made, it's permanent. Standing table at any of our locations whenever you want it. On the house. For life. I don't want free meals, Naomi said quietly. I wanted to be treated like a person. That's all I ever wanted. The line was quiet for a moment. You're right. And I failed you tonight. My company failed you. That stops now. After Evan hung up, promising to have his legal team contact her within the hour, the crowd began to disperse slowly, reluctantly, the way people leave a theater after a powerful performance. But many stayed, forming a protective circle around Naomi. The young man with dreadlocks introduced himself as Marcus, coincidentally the same name as her late husband, which made her eyes sting with tears again. I got everything, Marcus said, holding up his phone. Every word, every second. It's already uploaded to 3 different platforms in case anyone tries to take it down. Already got 200,000 views and climbing. The live streaming woman, who gave her name as Jennifer, wiped her eyes. I've never seen anything like that in person. I've seen the videos online, but witnessing it, God, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. Mrs. Patterson hadn't left either. She'd stayed close to Naomi, her weathered hand occasionally touching Naomi's arm, as if to confirm she was real. She was okay. She was still standing. Her husband stood behind her, silent but solid. I eat here twice a month, Mrs. Patterson said, her voice trembling with anger. I've seen how they treat certain people. The little looks, the slower service, the convenient mistakes with reservations. I convinced myself I was imagining it, that I was being oversensitive. But I wasn't, was I? No, Naomi said simply. You weren't. I should have said something before tonight, before it got this bad. You spoke up when it mattered. That's more than most people do. Ortega approached carefully, his young face creased with something that looked like shame. Dr. Wells, I need to apologize. I should have said something. I should have stopped him. I knew it was wrong, and I just stood there. Naomi looked at him for a long moment. This young officer who'd been caught between complicity and courage and had chosen wrong until it was almost too late. You know it was wrong. That's important. What you do next with that knowledge, that's what matters. I'm writing a report, Ortega said quietly. Everything I saw, everything Holloway did. I'm going on record. That'll cost you, Naomi said. I know, but staying silent costs more. Holloway had retreated to his patrol car, speaking urgently into his radio, his face twisted with the anger of a man who just realized he'd messed with the wrong person. Claire sat on a bench, her head in her hands, crying. Paul had disappeared entirely. Within an hour, news vans arrived. Within 2 hours, the story was everywhere. Local news, national news, trending on every social media platform. The videos from multiple angles were being dissected frame by frame. Legal analysts on cable news were already calling it a clear-cut case of racial discrimination and police misconduct. Civil rights attorneys were calling Naomi's phone, offering representation. But Naomi sat in her car with Lila finally asleep in the car seat, the adrenaline draining away and leaving only exhaustion and a bone-deep ache. She'd never made it inside the restaurant. Never had the anniversary dinner Marcus had planned. Never got to honor his memory the way she'd intended. Her phone buzzed with a text from Evan Cross. Security footage and witness statements have been turned over to the district attorney's office. They're reviewing for criminal charges. I'm also implementing mandatory anti-bias training across all Verity properties and creating an oversight board to handle discrimination complaints. I'd like you to serve on that board, if you're willing. Naomi stared at the message. Justice was coming, yes, but justice after trauma didn't erase the trauma. It just gave it context, consequence, a kind of official validation that yes, what happened was wrong, was illegal, was worthy of punishment. She drove home to the empty house she shared with her daughter and her grief, put Lila to bed with trembling hands, stood under the shower until the hot water ran cold, trying to wash off the feeling of handcuffs, of hands in her purse, of public humiliation, of her daughter's screams. The preliminary hearing came 6 weeks later. The courtroom was packed. Media, activists, community members, and nurses from St. Catherine's who'd taken personal days to support their colleague. Naomi sat in the front row wearing her white coat from the hospital, a deliberate choice. Dr. Wells, not just a victim, but a professional, a mother, a woman who saved lives and deserved basic human dignity. Claire Whitmore was charged with assault, battery, and filing a false police report. Her lawyer, a public defender who looked exhausted before the trial even began, tried to paint her actions as a mistake in judgment, as fear rather than malice. But the videos didn't lie. The audio didn't lie. Claire's own words caught on. Multiple recordings. This place isn't for people like you. Officer Grant Holloway faced more serious charges: illegal search and seizure, abuse of power, filing false charges, and violation of civil rights. His police union lawyer fought hard, arguing that Holloway had reasonable suspicion, that Naomi had been uncooperative, that the situation had been chaotic and difficult to assess. Then Ortega testified. The young officer took the stand in his dress uniform, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. He described in careful, damning detail how Holloway had targeted Naomi from the moment they arrived, how there had been no reasonable suspicion for the search, how Holloway had ignored contradictory evidence and witness testimony, how he'd threatened to call CPS not out of genuine concern, but as a weapon to ensure compliance. "Why didn't you intervene?" the prosecutor asked. Ortega's voice was quiet. "Because I was afraid. Afraid of going against a senior officer, afraid of being labeled a rat, of losing the respect of other cops, of damaging my career before it really started. I told myself that if I just kept quiet, if I just let it play out, it wouldn't be my fault. But silence is a choice. I chose wrong." The courtroom was silent except for the scratch of a journalist's pen on paper. Naomi watched Ortega's face, saw the cost of his testimony in the tightness around his eyes, the way his fellow officers in the gallery wouldn't meet his gaze. He was burning bridges to build a road toward something better, and she understood that kind of sacrifice in her bones. The defense tried to discredit him, suggesting he was testifying to save his own career, to distance himself from a bad situation. But the body camera footage backed up every word. Holloway's own recording device had captured his illegal actions, his threatening tone, his abuse of authority. The elderly couple, Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, testified too. They described what they'd witnessed with the clarity of people who'd finally stopped looking away. Other witnesses came forward. A waiter who'd seen Claire make racist comments about guests before. A former employee who'd been fired for questioning the restaurant's discriminatory seating practices. A black couple who'd been turned away 3 months earlier despite having a reservation. It wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The media coverage was relentless. Think pieces about racism in fine dining, about police accountability, about the particular vulnerability of black mothers in America. Naomi's face was everywhere. Her story became a flashpoint, a rallying cry, a mirror held up to systems that preferred to stay unexamined. The verdict came on a Tuesday afternoon. Claire Whitmore, guilty on all counts, sentenced to 18 months in prison, 3 years probation and mandatory community service at a civil rights organization. Her tearful apology in court felt performative, written by lawyers, empty of real understanding. Officer Grant Holloway, guilty on all counts, sentenced to 2 years in prison, stripped of his badge, barred from ever serving in law enforcement again. He didn't apologize, just stared straight ahead with the hard face of a man who believed he'd been wronged by the system rather than embodied its worst impulses. Paul Henning, the manager who'd stood by and watched, faced civil penalties and was banned from holding management positions in any Verity dining property. His career in hospitality was effectively over. Outside the courthouse, Naomi stood at a podium surrounded by microphones and cameras. Lila was with her sister today, spared the chaos. Naomi wore the same navy dress from that night, now cleaned and pressed, reclaiming it from the memory of trauma. "Justice doesn't start in a courtroom," she said, her voice steady and clear. "It starts the moment someone sees wrong and refuses to look away. It starts when witnesses pull out their phones and record truth. It starts when people speak up even when it's uncomfortable, even when it costs them something, even when staying silent would be easier." She paused, looking out at the crowd. Activists, community members, other survivors of discrimination who'd found their voices through her story. "I'm a surgeon. I save lives by making precise interventions at critical moments. But that night I needed saving. And the people who saved me weren't the ones with power or authority. They were ordinary people who made the extraordinary choice to see me as human, to film what was happening, to testify, to refuse the comfort of looking away." A reporter called out a question about the settlements. Verity Dining Group had paid an undisclosed amount, rumored to be in the millions. Naomi held up a hand. "The money matters because it acknowledges harm in a language corporations understand. But what matters more is what comes next. Verity has implemented new policies, bias training, oversight boards, complaint mechanisms with teeth. I'm serving on that board because change doesn't happen through lawsuits alone. It happens when people who've been harmed are given power to reshape the systems that harmed them." Another question, about Holloway and whether she felt the sentence was fair. Fair. Naomi considered the word. "He abused his badge. He targeted me because of my skin color. He threatened to take my child. 2 years seems light for that, but he'll never be a cop again, and maybe that's the real consequence, not being locked up, but being permanently removed from a position where he could hurt people. I hope he spends those 2 years thinking about every black person he's ever pulled over, every search he justified, every time he used his authority as a weapon. I hope it haunts him." The press conference ended. Naomi walked to her car through a crowd of supporters, people touching her arm, thanking her, crying, sharing their own stories of discrimination and trauma. She listened to each one, held their pain alongside her own, understood that her story had become larger than herself. 6 months later, the Amakofi Institute for Ancestral Medicine opened on the grounds of Hollowcrest Estate. But that's another story. This story belongs to Naomi, to one night when the world's ugliness showed its full face and people chose to document it, to speak against it, to stand in the gap. Naomi returned to work at St. Catherine's, to the operating rooms where her hands saved children regardless of their skin color or their parents' bank accounts. Her colleagues treated her differently now, some with newfound respect, some with discomfort, some with the distant kindness of people who didn't know how to acknowledge what she'd survived. But the children didn't care about any of that. They came to her broken and she made them whole, and that work continued to be the truest thing she knew. She never went back to Maison Aurel. The restaurant closed 6 months after the trial, unable to recover from the stigma, from the boycotts, from the simple fact that excellence in food couldn't cover up rotten values. The building sat empty for a year before being purchased by a collective of immigrant restaurateurs who transformed it into a community dining space where everyone was welcome and no one was turned away. Naomi kept the confirmation email from Marcus's reservation. She couldn't delete it, even now. Sometimes, late at night, when Lila was asleep and the house was quiet, she'd read it, remembering her husband's excitement, his love, his intention to make her feel special. "You work so hard," his voice echoed in her memory. "Let someone else take care of you for once." She'd never made it to that dinner. But in a strange way, Marcus had still taken care of her. His call to Evan Cross had saved both his girls when they needed it most. On what would have been their 7th anniversary, Naomi took Lila to a small Ethiopian restaurant in a neighborhood where no one asked questions about belonging. They ate injera and tibs, and Lila made a mess with her tiny hands, and the owner came by to coo over the baby and slip them extra dessert. "Beautiful family," the owner said in accented English. "Thank you," Naomi replied. "We're healing. That's the best kind of beautiful." Naomi thought about that later, driving home through the city lights with Lila singing nonsense songs in her car seat. Healing as beauty. Survival as resistance. The simple, radical act of continuing to exist fully in a world that had tried to diminish her. Her phone buzzed with a message from Ortega, the young officer who'd found his courage too late, but had found it nonetheless. He'd left the Westbridge PD and was now working with a police reform organization, training officers on implicit bias and de-escalation. His message was simple. "Started a new training program today. Used your case as the example of everything we get wrong. Thank you for not giving up on us." Naomi didn't respond immediately. Forgiveness was complicated, earned in inches rather than granted in sweeping gestures. But maybe that was okay. Maybe justice wasn't about perfection, but about people choosing, again and again, to do better than they did before. She pulled into her driveway, carried her sleepy daughter inside, tucked her into the crib Marcus had assembled with such careful attention before he died. Lila's breathing evened out into sleep, innocent and trusting, unaware of how close she'd come to being stolen by a system that called cruelty protection. Naomi stood in the doorway watching her daughter sleep, one hand on her own chest, feeling her heartbeat, alive and angry and grateful and exhausted and determined. Tomorrow she'd operate on a 7-year-old with internal bleeding from a car accident. Next week she'd attend another oversight board meeting at Verity. Next month she'd speak at a conference about bias in public spaces. But tonight, she was just a mother who'd fought the world and won, standing guard over the child she'd refused to surrender. Justice had been served. Consequences delivered. Systems slightly shifted. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough to undo what happened, to give back the dignity that was stolen, to erase Lila's screams from her memory. But it was something. And sometimes, Naomi thought, something was enough to build on. Enough to keep fighting. Enough to believe that the arc of the universe might actually bend toward justice, but only if people put their hands on it and pushed. She closed Lila's door softly and went to pour herself tea, to sit in the quiet house she'd learned to inhabit alone, to exist in the strange space between trauma and healing where most of life actually happened. The story could have ended differently. So many stories like hers did. Lost in legal systems that ground victims down, buried under counter-narratives that blamed the survivor, forgotten when the news cycle moved on to the next tragedy. But this story ended with accountability, with change, however incomplete. With a woman and her daughter still together, still whole, still here. And that, Naomi thought, was its own kind of justice.